Okay, last video. If you've been following along with us, by now you should know how Douglas believes slavery victimized the slave as well as the slave owner. But there's a third group that Douglas claims fell victim to the institution that was slavery, and that was the non-slave owning white, the working class white person. Now, again, this sounds a little bit strange, considering you wouldn't think that the non-slave owning white would have much to do with anything regarding slavery, that they were basically innocent bystanders. Douglas believes that non-slave owning whites were absolutely victimized in this process, and had it not been for slavery, their lives would have been qualitatively better, would have been much, much better. You ask yourself how and why that is. Think about that for a second. What is it that slavery is really used to do, used to produce? Well, part of it is to produce these cash crops, tobacco, later on cotton. And if you think about it, the most expensive process of production is labor. I mean, really, think about it. The last time you took your car in to have it fixed, what was the most expensive part of having it fixed? Was the part? Was it the fluid that they had to pump into it? No, generally speaking, when you go in and have your car fixed, you pay for the labor because people that know how to install transmissions are not hanging out on every street corner. Anyway, labor has always been the most expensive part of the process of production, and things were definitely that was definitely the case back in the 19th century, which was what made the institution of slavery so very profitable for such a select few group of people. Douglas comments on this. I want you to flip this to page 226, this book, page 226. And if you've got the online version of this, I'm about 4 pages into chapter 20. 4 pages into chapter 20. So that's probably going to be somewhere in the vicinity of 115, 116. Anyway, in the middle of page 226 of this book, about right in the middle, the difference between the white slave and the black slave. Find that sentence. The difference between the white slave and the black slave. The difference between the white slave, he means the worker, and the black slave is this. The latter belongs to one slave owner, and the former belongs to all slaveholders collectively. In other words, the white slave is basically being violated by all the slaveholders. Why? The white slave has taken from him by indirection what the black slave has taken from him directly and without ceremony. Both are plundered, and by the same plunderers. The slave is robbed by his master of all his earnings above what is required for his bare physical necessities. And the white man is robbed by the slave system of the just results of his labor, because he is flung into competition with a class of laborers who work without wages. Now, what he's saying there is it's very difficult to compete with the guy that doesn't have to pay their workers anything. So you think about where all the wealth, all the money is concentrating itself in the middle of the 19th century in places like Maryland, places like the South. It's concentrating itself into the hands of wealthy people. So it was a classic example of the rich getting richer at the expense of everyone else. So what Douglas is arguing here is that slavery victimizes non-slave owning whites because it robs them of economic opportunities. It takes jobs away from them. I'm not necessarily saying that non-slave owning whites were dying to do the jobs of slaves. I'm simply saying that as a job category, why would you pay somebody to do something when there's a group of people that are being forced, they're being coerced to do it for free? It's taking economic opportunity away. That's what Douglas is saying. Now you ask yourself, why would the working class white community stand for this? What was it that convinced them to go along with this? Because think about this for a second. On the eve of the Civil War, only 25% of the white population of the South owned at least one slave. And if you think about movies, films like Gone with the Wind, huge slave plantations, that would probably be closer to 1%. A tiny, tiny, tiny minority of people controlled an immense amount of wealth, a lot of money. Douglas believes that the reason that everybody was going along with this was just good old-fashioned American racism. Skip to the bottom of the page there, a few lines down from the passage I just read you. They appeal to the pride, find that. They appeal to the pride. He's talking about slave owners. They appeal to the pride in often denouncing emancipation as tending to place the white working man on an equality with Negroes, and by this means they succeed in drawing off the minds of poor whites from the real fact that by the rich slave master they are already regarded but a single remove from equality with the slave. In other words, all these working class whites are so worried about being put on an equal social economic basis with the slaves that they can't see the forest for the trees. They're being blinded that every day slave owners are taking food out of their pantry by forcing them to compete with a segment of the working population that doesn't have any wages. They're taking economic opportunity away from them. Now, how does this relate to what you've been learning in class? That's a very good question. One of the things you can do to connect all this, tie it all together, is look at your online readings. There's a reading that I think would be particularly useful, and you can find it in the Online Readings 2 on page 31. It's entitled Notes on Indentured Servitude in Virginia. If you recall, both from the video and from your readings, there was a time when the working population, the coerced working population, slave population, was white. It was an indentured servant, somebody that had wanted to come to the New World to get a job for new opportunities, but didn't have the money to pay for the fare across the Atlantic Ocean. So what happened was some rich guy paid for their fare and said, "You'll work for me for a specified amount of time, usually about 5 years, and after that 5 years, we'll call it good." Well, what they didn't tell you was that you would basically be somebody's slave for 5 years. They were called indentured servants, and both the African American slave and the indentured servant had things pretty bad. Now again, this relates to what you've learned about in the background material. And if you get your textbook out, this big green book, if you turn it to page 56 and 57, what you're going to find is a big section at the top of 56 that's entitled Bacon's Rebellion. Read that section, and what you'll find out was that Nathaniel Bacon was one of these indentured servants. He was a white person, and what he wanted when he had worked off his servitude, his 5 years, is he wanted land. And because the state of Virginia wasn't willing to give him any land, he basically went on this riot. So what you can see is, through Bacon's Rebellion, you can see that there's a direct correlation between what Douglas is talking about, a lack of economic opportunities for working class whites, and it's directly caused by the institution of slavery. Now, I want you to read that section on Bacon's Rebellion so that you can come full circle with what's going on there. But consider this for just a second. In the aftermath of Bacon's Rebellion, what happens was two things. One, the rich people of Virginia basically paid off the working class by keeping taxes low and government really, really small. They didn't interfere in the lives of working class white American colonists. The second thing that we see happen is more and more rich planters, landowners in Virginia, began to rely on African American slaves and relied less and less on white indentured servants. Opportunities went away from the working class white community, but instead of blaming the real people that were behind these problems, in other words, the rich white population, they blamed African Americans. They blamed African Americans for the lack of economic opportunity. So you see this intense, antagonism between the working class community of white America and the African American slave community, when the real thing should be the white and black communities of the working class variety probably would have been better off uniting to oppose the rich people. So as you can see, even working class whites, non-slave owning whites, were victimized through this process of slavery. Now you've got all three groups now What you need to do at this point is try to tie everything together. If you have individual questions, please don't hesitate to email me. The best times to get a hold of me, I think I've mentioned this in the opening video, Monday through Thursday. So at this point, there's still plenty of opportunity to bounce an idea as far as a thesis, as far as bits of evidence that you are considering using. There's plenty of time to bounce those ideas off me. Let me know.